5 years ago, China drew a hard line and took back Hong Kong from the edge of chaos. Now let's rewind to 2019. There was a huge protest breaking out in Hong Kong over extradition bill. But it just didn't simply stay as a protest. It actually quickly turned into something far more dangerous, become a color revolution aimed at toppling the Hong Kong government. And the crowds were massive. The anger was even bigger. And it wasn't about the bill anymore. It became a movement that fueled by the hatred of anything linked to mainland China. So the Mandarin speakers on the street of Hong Kong, they were just attacked randomly. And worse than that, some protesters openly waved the foreign flags, American, British, and they called for sanctions and even tried to provoke the Chinese army stationed in Hong Kong. So hoping that Beijing would just strike back so the West could step in. It sounds familiar, right? Because that's a textbook regime change tactics. It's a playbook which they use in Kosovo, stir the chaos, bait intervention, and destabilize the whole region. At that point, it wasn't just about the local politics on the ground anymore. It became a national security threat to Beijing, so Beijing had to respond. So now here's where Hong Kong's own elites made the things worse. The bill itself was legitimate. It was meant to fix a legal loophole that let a murderer escape the justice. But once the streets were erupted, the Hong Kong government froze because they couldn't believe their own people were rejecting the system so aggressively. Because these elites, they had been shielded by the British colonial privilege for decades. And many assumed that Beijing's backing was just automatic because they spoke English and followed the common law. What they had never understood was a deeper frustration among the young Hong Kong people. There's rising rents, there's stagnating wage, and they had no future. So ironically, the same elites that helped to build this neoliberal economy and social system in Hong Kong, they created that despair. So as things spiraled, Beijing had to step in, not just to restore the order, but to reset the social foundations in Hong Kong. So then came 2020. China passed the national security law, one of its most popular moves among the mainlanders, because the chaos in Hong Kong wasn't just a local issue anymore. It actually threatened China's entire governance model. Far beyond Hong Kong's autonomy, there is one country, two system model functioning as a pilot project for China's future institutional reforms. In 2014, Beijing even offered Hong Kong a political reform package, more voting options. But it was also rejected. Why? Because the proposal never stood a chance, simply because it came from Beijing. The mainlanders start to see this clearly, that this wasn't about democracy. It was about Hong Kong's rejection of China itself. So by 2019, the mainlanders, their sentiments had shifted. The protests were not just seen as disobedience, actually were seen as a betrayal to the Chinese nation. So that's when the national security law drew the line. No more foreign interference, no more chaos, and no more illusions about this endless autonomy without any responsibility. So the Western governments, of course, they made some noise. They imposed some sanctions on Hong Kong. But I mean, with new leadership in Washington, even themselves, they actually moved on. The investors returned to Hong Kong, and the protest leaders, they were left behind. So here's a real takeaway. The protests begin with real concerns, but actually ended up with chasing the foreign agendas, targeting the wrong enemy, and isolating the people they claim to represent. And they actually pull off something huge, that they literally pissed off 1.4 billion Chinese people. So Beijing's response wasn't just about control. It was actually about preventing the national fracture. So Beijing's message is very clear. The colonial era is over. Hong Kong is now fully back under the Chinese governance as part of China. And the message is crystal clear. If you push too far, there will be huge consequences. And Taiwan should also take note on that one.